These rusty nuts and bolts were left out in the weather for a year to see which thread sealant best protected the engaged threads from rust. 1 year ago, grade 5, plain steel nuts and bolts were used, and blue Loctite thread locker, red Loctite thread locker, Permatex anti-seize, and DAP painter's caulk were applied. All the nuts and bolts were first cleaned with grease and wax remover and then 70% isopropyl alcohol. 2 control samples with nothing applied were torqued to 25 foot-pounds. Then 2 with blue Loctite, next 2 with red Loctite, followed by 2 with Permatex anti-seize, then 2 with DAP painter's caulk. And as a last-minute addition, plain zinc-plated samples. The zinc plating is applied for corrosion protection. This notch will indicate the location of the control samples. And the samples were hung on this fence out in the weather for a year. And after a year, here are the rusted nuts and bolts. We'll start removing the nuts starting from the notched end. First, the control samples that were not protected with anything. Surprisingly, no rust was found on the threads where the nuts and bolts contacted each other. This killed the rest of the test. Blue Loctite, no rust at the contact point. Red Loctite was a challenge to remove, but no rust at the contact point. Permatex anti-seize was the easiest to remove. No rust at the contact point. And DAP painter's caulk. I forgot to tap the record button when removing the nuts. No rust at the contact point. Finally, the zinc plating. Of course, no rust anywhere. So rust only appeared on the exposed surfaces of the plain steel nuts and bolts. I thought for sure the rainwater would have wicked into the threads and rusted the threads. A little research and it looks like iron, moisture, and oxygen are needed for rust to form. So maybe the torquing of the nuts and bolts sealed out the moisture and or oxygen? Let's experiment again. More plain steel nuts and bolts. 2 torqued to 25 foot-pounds. And 2 loosely fitted together. Again, 2 torqued and 2 untorqued. A duplicate setup was assembled. The one with the bent end will be mounted with the bolts horizontal, and the other with the bolts vertical. We'll see if torqued and untorqued will make a difference, as well as vertical and horizontal orientations for wicking.